And for all of us to, I think, have exciting sexual relationships, we need to embrace that reality, not ignore it. And right now, our culture is pretty dead set on ignoring all of that. The differences between male and female sexuality are only evident in long-term relationships. 1/3 of young women in their last sexual experience on a college campus were choked. Like 1/3 in their last sexual experience.
Is the whole idea of "and they lived happily sexually ever after" a fairy tale there?
Mother Nature was not interested in us having long-term relationships. She was not. This clashes against this Cosmo magazine, who women are. But the reality is that's where exciting sex can happen, is with those sort of dynamics of power.
What are, in your experience, the biggest misconceptions that women have about men's sexuality?
It's a fascinating question. And you know what I would say is I started with the same misconceptions as a new therapist like 25 years ago, which is I was reared in a home where I learned that we're all the same. The genders are all the same. I could do anything a man could do, which I absolutely support and agree with. But there are some distinctions sexually that don't follow that kind of like conceptualization. So when I started as a sex therapist, I thought if I created a safe space for everybody, I'd really hear the same challenges out of everyone. Like intimacy is challenging for people, that we know. And I sort of assumed I'd hear the same stuff, but that's not at all the case. It has never been. So it really threw me off at first because I was hearing things from men, that like they were feeling missed in a relationship. They wanted to be longed for. They felt like their partner wasn't engaged with them. I was hearing things from women like in heterosexual relationships, let me make that clear. Her partner wanted too much sex. He wanted to do too many things that she wasn't interested in doing, that he was sort of kooky, like he was not, like wanting things that didn't seem healthy or normal to her. And what I learned is that the truth of the matter is we are very different sexual beings. And from an evolutionary perspective, we've had different evolutionary influences on our sexuality for hundreds of thousands of years, and for good reason. So, it sort of comes down to biology, and we could get into the weeds of that if you want to, but it comes down to, sort of eggs and sperm and pregnancy and all of this. But there are certain sexual behaviors that support like successful procreation in men, and they're different than the sexual behaviors that support successful procreation in women. And for all of us to, I think, have exciting sexual relationships, we need to embrace that reality, not ignore it. And right now, our culture is pretty dead set on ignoring all of that. And that worries me because I think that makes people vulnerable for not being able to solve their inevitable sexual struggles. If they are not empowered with information, they're going to make misunderstandings of their own sexual experience, of their partners. There's going to be more shame. There's going to be more anger. There's going to be more blame. And there is. And so this does worry me because, we've spoken about AI and how powerful that can be. And I know we'll talk about it more. As AI gets more powerful, if we become less educated about who we are as sexual beings, that's not a good recipe for humanity, in my opinion. So I do worry about this.
Yeah. And I think the idea that we as sexes are the same, that will then imply that we want the same things. And then when women expect slightly different things from sex than men do, expecting your partner to work just like you do, to be turned on in exactly the same way that you do,
Right.
is just going to lead to confusion, arguments, just needs not being met, and then it just goes on and on and on and on.
Yeah,
So
that's true.
just give us few of the biggest differences when it comes to like men's sexuality and then female sexuality.
Okay. So some of the biggest differences. So I'm saying this more sort of, this isn't like research oriented, right? But more just, although some of it is more just off the cuff, what I can say is in general, and these differences show up in long-term relationships, not in short-term relationships. That's part of the confusion for everyone, is that women will have very similar experiences sexually with men when they're not partnered. But as soon as women get in a long-term relationship, things shift for them. And they don't shift for men. Okay. Mm-hmm. So that's the confusion, which we could discuss more if you'd like. So men just in general want more sex. They masturbate more. They think about sex more. They're certainly willing to pay for sex in ways that women rarely are. They want to do more experimentation and unusual stuff. Of course, there are exceptions, and there are going to be women listening to your podcast that say, oh, this is nonsense. Like, I love sexual creativity and I want more sex than my partner. And of course that exists. But I'm going to give you a side note to help those people understand what we're saying. So sort of in general, men are taller than women. Okay. Men are taller than women. None of us would disagree with that. Now, the way people approach understanding sex differences is they'll say, okay, well, men are taller than women, but there's more differences within the sexes than between, meaning that, there's going to be women that are taller than most men and women that are shorter than most men. And there's going to be men that are shorter than most women. So ultimately this, like, all these differences just sort of like absolve because there's so much difference within the genders. But that doesn't hold water really, because in truth, we know women are shorter than men. And if we say, there's no difference, we've lost all important information about height and gender. So that's what happens with sexuality. So when women say, wait, I want more sex than my partner, I'm sure you do. And I work with a lot of women who do. But if we're looking at the overarching reality, it's really quite distinct. The number of women in long-term relationships who come in and say to me, I'm watching too much porn, I can't stop, or I want more sex than my partner. I mean, that happens, but it's rare. It's really the other way around, that men want more porn, when men want more sex. And so these generalizations, I think, as I said, are important so people can understand their sexual experience. I feel like I got off track here. Did I?
It's basically, I mean, the averages really hide the ends of the scales, and the ends of the scales tend to be quite extreme. But I think just for my audience is quite clued up to things like that, because we discuss a lot of biological changes in evolutionary psychology. So you can talk without putting on average in every single sentence.
Okay, that's good. That's great.
Because we will be essentially talking about the averages an awful lot. So let's just let's just sort of say now that when we are discussing about things, we make generalizations.
Okay.
So it was you started basically talking about men sort of higher social sexuality, higher need for diverse, I suppose, experiences, a little bit more novelty and things like that. And I think you were just sort of about to move on to where sort of female sexuality tend to reside.
Okay, so female sexuality, women they have a higher disgust response, first of all, which means that with things sexual, they're more apt to feel like repulsed or disgusted. Now, this is tricky because at the beginning of a relationship, when lust is particularly high for everybody, lust trumps disgust. So at the beginning of a relationship, she's more like to be open to like unusual stuff or oral sex or anal sex or whatever it is. She's more open to it because she's feeling more lusty. So she's feeling more adventurous and can enjoy herself in those situations. As a relationship ages and lust decreases, it decreases for everybody. But the problem is for women, as lust decreases, she's like now staring her sexual disgust in the face, which means that like it doesn't trump the disgust anymore. So now years in, she's like, yeah, I used to like oral sex. I don't like it anymore. Yeah, I used to let my partner have anal sex with me, but I can't do that anymore. And everyone's confused because what's with the shift? But the
Mm-hmm.
shift is about sexual disgust. So that's one thing that I think is powerful for women. And plays out in their long-term relationships and distinguishes them from men. Another is that women have more negative reactions to things, meaning they have reasons to say no to sex in ways that men typically don't. And in fact, let me see, I have a lecture here on my desk, and it might be fun just to read one of my slides because I think it highlights this point really well. So there is here, there's a theory of sexual desire that it's called the dual process theory, where people have both inhibition factors, things that make them not want to have sex, and they have excitation factors, things that make them want to have sex. So an inhibition factor will be like the kids are in the house, or I ate too much dinner. An excitation factor would be, well, my partner is wearing like that outfit I really like, or I just watched some porn. So everybody's got a combination of inhibition factors and excitation factors, and women have more inhibition factors. Now, there's evolutionary reasons for this, I'm sure, which we could discuss, but the bottom line is women have more things to say no to than men do, and they have less things that turn them on than men do. So I'm going to read you an example. So when women come into my practice with a low libido, this is what I hear. I hear, I can't have sex. The kids are nearby. It's hard to be both a wife and a mother. Those are different skill sets, and it's difficult to switch. My body image isn't as good, particularly after having babies. I'm stressed at work. I'm sleep deprived. My parents were poor role models of sexual relationships, so I've never really seen it before. I've got these religious messages from the past that were like, don't have sex. So how can I suddenly want sex when I was supposed to not want sex for so long? Um, I don't have enough time for myself, let alone time to give to my partner. I've got medical problems that interfere with my desire, and I'm on medication that interferes with my sex life. And my partner doesn't do enough around the house. So it's hard to really want to be close because it's sort of like my partner's not engaged around the house. He's not home enough. He spends too much time at golf. He watches too much porn. He's not even physically attractive anymore. So I will hear that from women. And when I started in my practice, I was like, oh my God, of course you have no libido, right? Which is true. All of those are good reasons. They're all good reasons. And there isn't a woman watching this that would say, those aren't good reasons. They're good reasons. But men don't grasp these. I've never heard a man say, I can't have sex when the kids are in the house. No, I've heard I can't have sex when the kids are in the bed. I've heard that a bunch, right? But not I can't have sex when the kids are in the house. I don't hear that. On occasion, I'll hear things like I'm too stressed at work. Okay, I will hear that from men. But the point of the matter is, we women have these very legit inhibition factors that interfere with our desire to have sex. Men don't embrace all of them. So that leads to a distinction. And women have less things that turn them on. And as we age, we all lose some of that. So when we were in our 20s, there were things that really worked. When we're in our 50s, they may not work still. So, women then will say, I've lost touch with what turns me on. And that's really a very legit thing. I don't hear that from men.
Yeah. As you are talking, what I'm essentially hearing is that women have got higher threshold to reach in terms of both like inhibitions, but then also things that turn them on. Like they need more boxes ticking to actually get them, yeah, I'm ready or in the mood or even responsive to the partner. Whilst for men, it's a bit more like, I'm here, you're here, come on.
You know what? That is such a wise thing you just said, because that's the key to effective change for a woman, like effective therapy if she's in therapy. It's not to grasp onto all these inhibition factors and try to change them. It's to identify how to amp herself up and intensify that experience. And that's what's, from a therapy perspective, what's most helpful for women. Amping up what's exciting, like she needs more attention that way. And she may not even know what's going to work. She needs to sort of explore. But that's the key to change that.
I think what's really interesting about your particular experience is because you've been doing this for such a long time, you will be able to maybe explain to me and the audience couple of trends that we're seeing. So there's been numerous research done to say that in general, young people who we would expect to have the most sex are now having less sex than the previous generations. How do you understand that? What's going on there?
So that really worries me. It's a trend that is not appearing to change. In fact, it's only appearing to intensify, and it's been going on a while. So, COVID exacerbated this whole thing, but it was happening before COVID. So let's just say that. And I think that there are multiple reasons why this is unfolding in this way. Where to start, I'm not even sure which to say is most important. But one factor must be that it's super easy to access porn and masturbate online. So first of all, that longing for a release is no longer a motivator for people to hook up or have sex, at least as much. I shouldn't say it's not a motivator, but people can have as many orgasms as they're capable of so easily online. So that sort of takes away some of the motivation to do the uncomfortable work of finding a sex partner, finding a relationship. So that's one thing, just the ease of access. There's the element of people are kind of becoming afraid of reaching out and accidentally offending a dating partner. So they're men will say they're afraid, or younger men, they're afraid of coming up to a woman in a bar. It's going to offend her. She's going to get upset. She's going to get scared. Like the rules of the game have changed so much. They don't know what's acceptable and how there's a loss of confidence into, how can I come on to this person in a way that's appealing for them and enjoyable for them? So there's a loss of confidence from the Me Too movement. Now there was real good that came through that Me Too movement, but also people are misunderstanding and they're scared of how to approach people now. So that's an issue. And I think a very primary point is our kids are now raised online to such a degree. They don't have the social skills. They don't have the social confidence, even to have a conversation, let alone have a kind of conversation that could lead to a date. So this is a huge problem. And I'm very happy lately with the sort of the push to take phones out of schools and stuff, because our kids need that socialization if they're going to have relationships that are with another human as opposed to AI. So, that's.
I think for me, this is so big. The fact that when I was a teenager, I think I got my first phone when I was 14, but it was a phone that was just good for calling and texting and playing Snake. There was absolutely zero, it wasn't really a toy, for example, or a tool that could replace proper social sort of dilemmas and all these flirtations. And I remember when 13, 12, 14, you would have a crush on someone and it's how the heck do I do it? How do I get them to pay me some attention, to even notice me? And then it used to go on for weeks and weeks, and it was so awkward. But you were getting better and better and better.
Right.
And even when you then sort of start into your 20s, it's still not comfortable, but you can do it. But it's simply because of the practice. Now, if you had something that would satisfy that need just enough to keep you ticking,
right,
you would never push yourself through that embarrassment and
that's so right.
just experimentation, because you feel like a fool. Like you've got no idea what you're doing,
Yeah,
and you are putting yourself at risk,
right.
essentially, because the stakes are high. Like that guy that you fancy, like you've probably been like dreaming about him for the last 3-4 months in
Yeah.
class. So, when you are 12, 13, 14, that is a big problem for a 14-year-old.
I absolutely agree with that. Yes, it is.
Okay, so let's focus a little bit on the porn, because I think porn is one of these things that it's difficult to put it back in the bag. Like there is no removing porn from our lives completely, I don't think.
No,
And
I think so.
the interesting thing about it is that an argument could be made that porn is essentially a market response to human fantasies, right? Because if there was no demand for online porn of various flavors and intensity, it wouldn't exist.
Right.
Yet we do see it exist,
Right.
and it tends to exist in a more fetish way that sort of most people would admit that their fantasies, that this is where their fantasies actually reside. So can you just talk to me about the interplay of that? Like, is porn a true reflection of our fantasies, or does it tend to corrupt our fantasies over time?
So this is a controversial topic. I mean, even within my like sex therapy organizations, and there will be arguments between people on a stage about this that become like yelling, very emotional. So that's one of the problems here is we're so geared toward calling this all good or all bad that we're having a hard time appreciating the nuances and educating ourselves so that we can make sure this is not damaging for adolescents, for example. Like I have for years avoided this conversation, frankly, because I don't want my colleagues to call me sex negative. I do not consider myself sex negative. I do, though, think that, few things are all good or all bad, and this is powerful, and it's only becoming more powerful. So we absolutely need to understand the nuance here. Do I think that many people are exposed to sexual scenarios that they wouldn't have even thought about before? Yes, I think so. And are they being taught maybe some ways to be sexual that they would not have entered their consciousness before this porn? Yes, I think so. And the evidence for this is simply with the amount of choking on college campuses. I don't know what's going on in the UK with this, but the research is astounding.
I think similar.
Yeah. Okay. So like 1/3 of young women in their last sexual experience on a college campus were choked. Like 1/3 in their last sexual experience. That's not how many women have been choked right. And now, so here's the thing. I really don't care from if it turns people on and it's consensual and safe, that's great. But the problem is the research is also finding that women are not reporting that this amplifies necessarily their sexual experience. That we have that data already, that they're not reporting that. Plus, we know college students are more apt to use drugs and alcohol. Things can go wrong. This is like prior to this recent, like last decade where this really sort of took off, there were very few people that engaged in choking, autoerotic asphyxiation, or choking together. And on occasion, it would make the news. It was often gay guys, and it would make the news because something went wrong and somebody like choked to death. Now it's like part of the general sexual repertoire. So yes, I think that is evidence enough that this is changing people's sexual experience, and that does, and maybe what they think about, what they fantasize. And I'm kind of convinced that college students don't even know what maybe a balanced sexual relationship would be, with some exciting stuff and some stuff that leads to connection. Like, I don't think they necessarily know that because their education has been porn. So, you know, so for what that, so yeah, I do worry about this, and it's super potent. Porn is an example of what we call a supernormal stimuli. Are you familiar with that term?
No, I haven't come across it before.
Okay.
No.
So a supernormal stimuli is basically a word. It's often used in sort of evolutionary biology, and it relates to the fact that we have certain instincts. We're sort of primed to want certain things, whether it be food or sex or what have you. And this stuff is kind of like we carry it in our DNA. It's really in our instinctive unconscious, or however else you want to look at it. And what a supernormal stimuli is it's a stimuli that we've created today that meets that need that's ancient and pre-wired. So we pre-wired in us. So like, for example, with food, we see this with food today, and that we've added so much to food that it's no longer the kind of food that people ate 1,000 years ago, right? So while apples existed 1,000 years ago, and we are as a species oriented to like sweets because that gave us more calories on the prairie, and we're always trying to find enough food 1,000 years ago, that was hard. So those of us who liked sweets had a better chance of eating more calories and then procreating and passing on that right. Okay. So same thing. So apples occur in nature. Apple pie is a supernormal stimuli. We like sweets, right? But there's no apple pie in nature. So what we've done is we've had sugar and sweet. We've had
bit of fat, bit of texture, bit of crunch, and then it's like an orgasm on the plate, essentially.
Exactly. Exactly. So like tonight, if we wake up at 2 a.m., like if you and I, if we had an apple in our kitchen, I can guarantee neither of us are going to think, wow, there's an apple in there. But if we had apple pie in our kitchen, it would occur to me, I can say, should I get out of the bed and get a piece of apple? So that's a supernormal stimuli. And that's what even porn is. And porn is like the sort of the lower key level of sex tech now and what's becoming available. But porn gives us more stimulation. It meets that need, that sexual need of interest and intensity, the stuff that feeds our more primal sexual instincts, which we all have. Some of us are more in touch than others, but at any rate. So yeah, so porn meets that need in a way that a partner can't really necessarily, or at least many partners can't present things quite so basely, quite so intensely, that sort of thing. So that's, and it's only getting more intense with like VR and stuff.
I think it's interesting as well because a lot of the sexual behavior, even though we don't like talking about it because it's, we're a bit too prim and proper to really dig into it. But a lot of sort of, the fantasies around sex will be leaning into taboos.
Yeah.
But the problem is that taboo 50 years ago was, a naked woman in a magazine.
Yeah.
It was just a magazine. It wasn't moving. Usually it had that woman had at least some parts covered, so it wasn't all exposed.
Yeah.
Whilst right now you've got the video, you've got sound effects, you've got it all right there in front of you happening. It's way more immersive. So if you really want to keep pushing into and looking for taboo, you will naturally drift, especially if you are actually spending a lot of time in the online porn. And I think it's really then, it then puts a bit of the challenging, I suppose, obstacle in the way of people, because what the hell do we do with that? So, I mean, let's go straight into it, because VR, essentially, and the AI and the the hybrid of the two technologies at some point is going to push that taboo even further. It will be even more immersive than
Right.
the online porn that we've already got.
Right.
So how do you see those technologies affecting relationships?
So, gosh, where to even start, honestly? But
Anywhere.
let me say this. So right now, as potent as porn is, about 5% of men and 3% of women have a problem with it to the degree that it's impacting their lives in some significantly negative way. Now, you're asking about impacting relationships, not necessarily to the degree that it's going to ruin a relationship, but have an impact. And obviously there's going to be higher numbers than that. But for the most part right now, the way the potency of porn today, in spite of the potency, we still have the same research numbers of about 5% of men, maybe up to 3% of women have a problem with it. And there's a variety of reactions. So a lot of people don't find it harmful or difficult to deal with at all. So that's what's true about porn right now, in spite of its potency. But where we're going with VR is a whole other animal. And so can I say my experience with VR? Because I think a lot of people haven't had it yet.
Yeah, of course. Go on.
Okay. So this is not about porn. This is just about general VR. I think that until I experienced it, I didn't appreciate the potency of what we're getting ourselves into. I really did not. So I was in New York City with my husband, and there was an Oculus store. So Oculus is like right now, it's the most popular maker of VR glasses. They're owned by Facebook. So they had this store where you go in and you try these different games and see what you want to buy for your headsets. Well, I just wanted to try VR. So we went in there and we're looking around, and there was mostly games where you chase the aliens or you're dealing with dinosaurs or whatever else. It was really very not my speed. But there was a game called Walk the Plank, which was really just a piece of wood on the floor, and you'd find in a garage, just a piece of wood. And the game was you put on the glasses and you feel like you're going up an elevator, 40 floors. And when the elevator appears to open, you think that you're 40 floors above a New York City street and your plank is right there and you're supposed to walk the plank over the street. So the woman who was running this game was really sweet, really fun. And we were all laughing. I mean, it was really funny. So my husband's on my left. This woman's on my right. I put on my glasses. It really, truly feels like you're going up an elevator, which I do not understand how they make that happen, but it did. I mean, it really felt like you were in the elevator, the doors open, and oh my God, I totally panicked. I grabbed the woman in a bear hug, totally like this. Now, we're all laughing because it was funny. I knew I was standing on the ground. I knew it, but my body didn't know it. My body didn't know it. I knew it, So this woman's laughing so hard, she's shaking. She's had to have been used to this. My husband's next to me, totally cracking up. I'm laughing. But I couldn't move. I couldn't move. And she's like, let's just take a step. I'll help you. Let's take a step. I couldn't do it. Do you know, I couldn't let go of her to take my glasses off. She had to take off my glasses. That's how potent it was. And we were laughing the whole time. So then it was my husband's turn. And I thought, well, he's going to totally rock this because he just saw me fail. We're all still laughing. He puts on the glasses. He goes up the elevator. The doors open. He sits on the ground. And he stopped laughing. So I'm looking at this woman and she's looking at me and we're like, I think we shouldn't laugh. I don't think this is funny anymore. And so he took off his glasses and we left right away. And he turned to me. We walked out of the building and he goes, I need to sit down. Okay. He goes, I almost died. Now he knew he didn't almost die, but that's the intensity of this VR. That's really, so your body responds to what it's seeing. Now what you know is true. It really doesn't matter what you know is true. So
it's so fascinating because as a mammal, as an animal species, we are very, very visual. Like, unlike dogs, cats, most mammals out there are way more sensory. They rely on olfactory system way more than we do. We
Mhm.
are all about sight, essentially. And I think it must be something to do with the fact that that's our primal, like that's our primary
Yes, I think
sense-making mechanism, so it overrides other things. I mean,
yes.
I'm guessing that would be the case.
I think it
But
is. I
then,
think that we're evolutionarily designed to understand the world from 100,000 years ago, whatever we see today, we're going to pass through that lens.
and I think, obviously, I mean, that the VR thing, it's going to be a big change. I think once you sort of get like a doll that can move, and then you've got the VR on top of it, to the
Yeah.
point where you can have a partner, willing or not, that
Right.
that would do whatever it is with you that you want, plus then this visual spectacle of whatever it is that you want to design
Mhm.
around you. That's going to be very potent. And I think mixing that currently, for example, with the incel culture of men that are just completely checking out of the dating game,
Mhm.
men that perhaps, men and women, I think it's now both sexes that are
Yeah.
really, I think we are getting to the point where younger people are getting so mistrustful of the other sex,
Mhm.
that they are not even putting themselves out there.
Yeah.
And even when they do, perhaps some negative experience will be enough for them to just say, you know what, no, I'm done with this.
Mhm.
And that will give those people the experience that has got the intensity, but it doesn't have the depth. Like, it
Yes.
doesn't have the meaning. And I think that, oh yeah, it's strange because I can't see that particular mix hybrid of clientele and the product is going to be particularly beneficial. But again, like, I can't see how we will be able to stop it. And like, but even trying to think about people trying to use it to spice up their lives. I mean, you might be able to help me out with this.
Mhm.
Let's say that you've got a monogamous relationship.
Mhm.
People want to stay together, but they've lost the spark, whatever.
Mhm.
There is this technology there. They want to use it to try and see whether they can sort of, I don't know, get the sparks going again.
Right.
How do you think that will affect the jealousy? Because, yeah, you're not technically cheating on your partner, but it's not, the partner is not, your partner in that scenario is not being turned on by you.
Right. Right. So great question. And I do try to integrate this potent tech in ways that can be helpful for my couples. And it is very different for different people. And the research shows that like some women feel less jealous about an artificial partner, like an AI partner or VR porn or whatever, than another human. And other women feel more jealous. So it's sort of, at least in this particular study, it depended on how they felt competitive. If they felt competitive with the appearance of AI, then AI was worse than a human, because sort of like the avatars, the sex styles, they're like exaggerated sex characteristics and or would be considered like perfect looking partners, that sort of thing. So if your jealousy as a woman is through appearance, then that could be more difficult. But if your jealousy as a woman is through the depth of a relationship, then real people would be more difficult. But it's going to be a challenge for folks. Yes, I do try to bring that into relationships because frankly, I think monogamy is more challenging for people to maintain over time than it's ever been before in the history of humanity for a variety of reasons. People have more options for cheating with tech the way it is. And people have less motivation to stay together. We used to need a partner to have and raise a family, or we'd need a partner to be financially stable. None of that is really needed anymore. And so those motivations for working through challenges in a relationship are kind of dissolving. So as a result, people are less motivated to stay together, and then they have more options to cheat. So people are challenged with this monogamy issue, and I do try to help them integrate stuff, but it does depend on the people in particular. And if they can make love, have solid, impactful, meaningful sex sometimes, then integrating some of this other stuff can amp up excitement and I think really be quite helpful. But if they're missing that, like the bottom line, love making sex, then they don't have a depth to attach this other stuff to. And this other stuff, I think, can ultimately risk being more exciting. So I think that this goes back to why I think it's so important we have the conversations you and I did earlier about like the difference between male and female sexuality and stuff. To have that deep sexual connection over time, you've got to really understand our physiology, our biology, and how that plays out in the bedroom so that you can create this kind of diversity of sexual experience together and have it be powerful. And I worry, this is sort of a little bit off, but there's a lot of negativity right now directed at men, like, there's this orgasm deficit that people talk about. Men are more apt to have orgasms than women, and it can turn negative to men, like what's wrong with them? They don't care that women don't have orgasms, or they're not giving women orgasms. But actually the reality is our physiology is such that we have similar erectile tissue. For women, it's under the skin. For men, it's a penis. No, but for women, it's almost like that penis is hidden under her pelvic floor. So it's more challenging to stimulate. That's it. It's more challenging to stimulate. So when we go blaming men for this orgasm deficit, I think that if we put 20, 40 condoms on a guy, he'd have an orgasm deficit too. Meaning do you know what I mean? Like if he wouldn't be able to. So it's like, what we have
I just imagined it for a minute.
I think we need to understand the physiology and stop blaming people and start understanding how to work with this ourselves.
I can't get the image of my head now. Oh, Marianne, what have you done to me? Oh,
Funny. Yeah, we'll take time for water.
Yeah, we'll edit it out. The quick break for the water.
Oh, but anyway.
Okay, so blaming men essentially for, the fact that women are just essentially built a little bit more challenging, exactly. I suppose.
Right. So this, yeah, exactly.
Okay, so, you've essentially given us some of the challenges to keeping the sex alive in the monogamous relationship. So, is the whole idea of "and they lived happily sexually ever after" a fairy tale there, then, or is it actually possible?
I would say to you, it's possible, but it requires a lot of attention. So it requires people being kind of responsible for keeping themselves engaged with their own sexual experience and not expecting their partner to kind of do that, but people being responsible for themselves. And when people, we hear people say, you got to make sex a priority. Like you really do need to take time and effort and either schedule it or identify ways to keep things interesting. The truth of the matter is it doesn't have to compete with the creativity of porn to be solid together, but you do need to not do the same thing every time. You've got to be willing to step out of your comfort zone sometimes. Like there are things that aren't necessarily easy, but necessary if people are going to stay connected over time. And one thing that's interesting is in a long-term relationship, like we talked about, as lust diminishes over time, women have a harder time with that than men. So everyone will say, yeah, over time, there's less lust than there used to be. But men are still like, but I love my wife. I want to have sex. They still say that. Women will say, yeah, I love my husband, but I'm not so interested anymore. So women have a harder time with that. And I think maybe, I don't know, maybe it's because we have more of those inhibition factors. And so less lust, but all these other things kind of make a difficult kind of recipe for us to get through. But we have to. If what we value is this level of connection with a partner. But what often happens is women feel like they've lost their interest. The lust factor went down, and then they either don't want to have sex, or they maybe get amped up by another partner, so they leave the marriage. Women are more likely to end a marriage than men in educated populations by a significant amount.
I've heard that before. So have you got a sense of why that is? I mean, I've got a sense of what it might be, but I was wondering whether you will probably have a more educated answer to that than mine.
When I look at it through the lens of being a sex therapist, I think it's exactly what we're talking about, that we want to have an exciting sex life through our lifetime, and we know we deserve it. And, we're sort of taught to create that, but it's harder for women to create that in long-term relationships than it is for men in general.
Whilst in a fleeting relationship, it's right there, like ready now.
Right.
Ready-made, ready packaged with a bow on the box.
Exactly.
Okay.
So as soon as she leaves her relationship or has an affair or starts dating, her sex drive's back because she's back in a new relationship. It's another back into that short-term relationship. And remember when I said that the differences between male and female sexuality are only evident in long-term relationships. So as soon as she gets her divorce or starts having an affair with someone at the office or whatever it is she's doing, she's going to feel back in her vital sexual self. And that's fabulous. This isn't at all a message not to have that. But what I think is important for women to get is that when they're with this partner for a period of time, they're going to go back to the same dynamic that they're feeling that they left a relationship for before. And as soon as that short-term relationship becomes long-term, all that same dynamic, that same evolutionary stuff that impacts women will impact again. So I think we just need to be aware of that and decide based on that what's important for us, each of us individually.
So it's not the partner that is robbing her of that sexual vitality, it's the biology.
It is. And, Mother Nature was not interested in us having long-term relationships. She was not. That was not her motivation.
Well, the job was done within several years, right?
That's right. Exactly.
Okay. So we know that women tend to leave the partners more in pursuit of let's call it that sort of passionate hot sex. But we also know that it's actually men that have got the higher need for the novelty. So what's happening then for men in the relationships? Do they get that novelty of porn? Do they just stay miserable forever? Or do they go and look for that novelty on the side as well? How does it work for men?
So all of that plays out, for some guys. But I think it's more often the case that men can get their novelty in their minds with their porn, whatever else, and are than them cheating. At this point, men and women cheat at the same rate. Not entirely, but for the most part, men cheat more online. But I think men are online a little more than women. Like men do a little bit more of their life online. And so that maybe as women engage more and more online, we'll see that as a difference as well. But for the most part, in real life, the numbers are the same in terms of infidelity.
Okay. So when you're looking at sort of trying to essentially bring back that hot, passionate sex, what are the sort of the raw ingredients, speaking biologically? So what I'm trying to do is sort of outline what it is that we need to get, and then perhaps some of the ways that people might be able to get it back.
So in general, I would break it down to two kind of basic kinds of sex. There's lovemaking, and then there's more, let's say, intense primal kind of sex. Okay. So lovemaking is like sex from the heart. That's truly like making contact and expressing love with words, with your eyes, with touch. And I kind of lead people through a process of how to do that. Like you can watch TV and make eye contact with someone or see someone on TV, like a politician you hate. You can feel your face get, tight, like your eyes get tight, like you feel it. When you see like someone you love, like your child, you can feel your eyes soften. Like all this nonverbal stuff is really very applicable to lovemaking. So just learning how to let your eyes soften and show love, learning how to use your fingers in a way that touches your partner's body in a way that loves them, shows them that you love them, as opposed to just, picking up a notebook or whatever else. Like developing that like awareness with how to, in a nonverbal way as well as verbal, express that, and then bring that into the bedroom. So that's like lovemaking. You put on sweet music, and it's more of like heart to heart is what the connection is. And then there's the primal stuff. That's more like pelvis to pelvis. That's the stuff that gets channeled to porn a lot. It's the stuff that is very intense, but people can oftentimes feel self-conscious bringing that more into the bedroom. But you got to find a way to bring some of that more primal energy, or things are going to get boring. You kind of need to be able to bring them both. And they're both vulnerable feeling, frankly. So they both, like if people are trying not to feel too vulnerable, sex is going to get really boring really fast because everybody's going to stay into like a little, space where they feel safe enough. It feels vulnerable to be emotional. It feels vulnerable to be like sexual, but avoiding that vulnerability then means things get channeled outside of the relationship to porn or whatever. And that takes away a lot of that important energy. So I sort of speak about people becoming more responsible for bringing different kinds of sex into the bedroom. And one of the homeworks I like to give clients that I think can make a point is picking different kinds of music, like something super romantic, something kind of angry and hard rocky, something maybe sultry that you would hear like in a jazz bar, and then practice on your own, like all by yourself, moving your body to those different kinds of music, because your body will move differently. So how can you bring that energy in and out, like sort of through your body? And then getting more comfortable with that movement that's loving versus that movement that's intense and kind of angry versus that movement that's super sensual. And how can you bring that into the bedroom in different ways? So, we always hear, try something different in the bedroom. But the problem is people run out of things that they're willing to try. There's only so many new things you can try, but you can bring energy in, and it doesn't have anything to do with how you're touching or being touched, sort of like from a strict sexual perspective, but it's more about bringing that energy from your body into the room. That keeps things interesting. And people, that can go a long way. It doesn't have to be crazy. It can go a long way.
Yeah. I think what made me think when you were talking about that sort of that primal sex was that it clashes a little bit with that cosmopolitan magazine version of feminism, where it's like a girl boss, independent, doing it all herself.
Mm-hmm.
I can be just like a man. But when it comes to sex, and again, women don't like to admit that, but they are quite often turned on by a man being the dominant
Right.
thing,
Okay.
the dominant force in the bedroom.
That's great.
It is no surprise that Mr. Grey was the bestseller in women for like years. I mean,
Yes.
has that book been even beaten
I don't
today
think so.
by, because it went crazy.
Right. It did. It went absolutely crazy. I think it started in the UK, if I remember correctly, but it did. So we're
Couldn't
talking about
even tell you, but
Gray. Yeah, all over the world. And that's a good point. And that, that's, it goes back to sort of like we like to blame men about stuff, but we have to be careful about that. There are some men that deserve blame, but for the most part, there's some aspects to female sexuality that we ought to own. Like you're saying, this clashes against this Cosmo magazine, who women are. But the reality is that's where exciting sex can happen, is with those sort of dynamics of power. And it's important, I think, for people to recognize if they're trying to create that in their own life experience.
yeah.
I'm with you on that.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I mean, I could I could talk to you for hours. We will be soon running out of time. So what I want to sort of end with is perhaps if you just sort of give men and women like the three good chunks of advice if they want to just make their sexual relationship a bit better with the partner, like the things that they can try relatively easy,
Okay.
that gives them sort of some value in terms of like that doing these little things is actually going to make a little bit of a difference, so then they feel like it's
Okay.
worth continuing.
Okay. Can I say before we go, this is beautiful to focus on, but I would love to throw in just a little advice to parents about preparing their kids for exposure to porn and VR.
Go on, absolutely.
So this is probably my biggest worry, is that young kids are unprepared to be exposed to this stuff, and they don't know how to metabolize it. And I worry that does play into their lack of interest in dating and stuff, because porn can look pretty scary. I mean, as adults, we can see stuff and go, whoa. Like, imagine if you're 13. So here's the thing, like, the average age that children are exposed to porn is age 13. Now, it's not yet VR porn, it's regular porn. But nonetheless, as careful as parents may be in trying to manage that, kids are accessing it from their friends, older siblings, and whatever else. I mean, it's out there now. They can fall into it accidentally on their own phone or laptop. So I think studies consistently show that parents underestimate their kids' access to porn and how young or old they are. They underestimate how young they are when they access it and how much they can get to it. And so parents, I think, is maybe prepared as they may feel to have these kinds of conversations. They've got to start a connection with their child that says, like, this is out there. It's fantasy. It's not necessarily reality for everybody. I think you want to be careful not to be like, oh, you can't watch it, because as soon as it becomes not allowed, then it's going to become compelling in a different way. So you got to be careful with all of that, but just say, this is one way people have sex. It's not all. This is more like in the movies. Like, just find ways to start to have some kind of dialogue about that, and do your best to make sure your child knows they can talk to you about sex. So when they first experience it, they know they can go to you and say, that was weird, I just saw this, whatever. And you're not going to get angry. How'd you see that? No more talking to that friend or whatever. If you're able to do that, because a child, I think there's no way really to prepare them. But if you have a solid relationship talking about sex before they're age 13, so that they already have a relationship around discussing sex stuff, then when they see the porn, it's going to be maybe easier for them to metabolize. So here's what we know about kids. I want to say there are two times in our lives as human beings that our brains change and form dramatically. One is infancy, and the other one is early adolescence. And at these times, what happens for early adolescence is brain connections get pruned, like things you're not using gets removed, things you are using gets focused. I can't even think of the right word for this, but there's a great word for this. But anyway, our brains are changing and particularly responsive to what we're perceiving in the world and what we're experiencing. So adolescents are particularly vulnerable to being impacted by sex tech in general. So I just want parents to please like start having more dialogue with their kids about it. Talk to other parents about it, how other parents are handling it. Don't ignore it. It's a real thing.
Okay. That's great. Actually, I completely forgot about it, but it's like you say, it's just so ubiquitous right now that
Right.
It wouldn't be a good exposure, for a 13-year-old girl, for example, to see that as a sort of and think that this is it, this is sex.
Right.
Quite scary.
I would think so. I mean, when I was 13, if I saw that, I think it would really panic me. I mean, I have no way to know because I can't go back in time, but I don't think that would have gone over well for me.
Yeah. Okay. So in terms of some sort of tools for the adults as well.
Yeah. So I would say a couple of things. Life is hard and it's getting more stressful for many, many people. The statistics we see about people's stress levels are extraordinary these days. And again, from an evolutionary perspective, I think we're completely unprepared to deal with like the level of information we have to metabolize every day. We're unprepared to deal with the level of trauma throughout the world we're asked to metabolize every day. We're built to manage a world of a small group of people. Like for hundreds of thousands of years, we traveled we were in groups of 60 or something like this. Like that's the level of conflict we kind of learned to deal with, but now we're exposed to so much more. The point of this is that stress closes us. It gets us tight. If we're tight, which we are from turning on the news, there's no good sex from that place. So really important point to enjoy your sex life and enjoy your body is first of all to have a regular way of decompressing. Some people do yoga. There's great research that shows that yoga can help people enjoy their sex lives more. Some people meditate, maybe going out in nature, going for a walk, getting massages, taking responsibility for de-stressing and letting yourself expand so that touch will feel good, so that you have an open heart. Like that's a necessary component of a sexual relationship. And it is as important as any sexual piece of the puzzle, meaning like how you're touched or what you do. It's getting your body in a state where you're receptive for sex. And we all, I think, need to bring attention to that now and consciousness to that now. So that's a part of life. Don't be discouraged about scheduling sex, because all of life, we're so over scheduled now. It's just very difficult to find time to do anything. So sex is like that. As much as people say they want like a spontaneous sex, I mean, what really is, I think, for the most part, very effective for couples is identifying how much sex they agree they're going to have every week, once or twice or whatever it is they're doing, and then getting it in the books so that people are prepared for that. So things don't throw people off, especially if one of the partners is a little less with desire. That way that partner can like orient themselves that day to make sure they're prepared for sex when the time comes. So I think that's a good idea. Don't minimize the impact that hormones can have on your sexual experience. As we age, our bodies, our sexual bodies lose a lot of their oomph. So orgasms are harder to have. They're not as exciting. There's not as much desire. That's a natural part of an aging body. But hormone replacement therapy can be super helpful for people, not just with regards to sex, but all kinds of things. It's just got misunderstood, at least in our country, it got way misunderstood in terms of the dangers and this sort of thing. So read up. I hate to even say that because so much it's put out about hormone replacement is not accurate. So it's even hard to tell you where to get. I would get there's an international, for people who want to know, international society called ISSM, the International Sexual Medicine Society, ISSM. I think it's like .org or something. Look about hormones there, and look at the International Society for the Study of Women's Sexual Health. It's called ISWSH, ISSWSH.org. You'll get solid information and good research from both of those organizations to direct yourself. And I even have my clients take this information to their doctors. Like their doctors may not have access to this cutting edge, whatever. Okay, so don't minimize the possibility of hormones. And take time before you connect with your partner. If you feel like your desire isn't there, you want to get yourself kind of in the mood by yourself first. So don't go into a sexual situation just like cold and think that something's going to happen with you and your partner and suddenly you're going to get turned on. You have to kind of get yourself into receptivity mode before you join your partner. So that might mean, take a hot bath, or masturbate a little bit, but not to orgasm, or read a little erotica or watch some porn, not to have an orgasm, but just to sort of remind yourself you're a sexual being and become more receptive. And then touch with your partner will feel better, and you'll find more of what you're looking for when you've already sort of started that process. And last thing I'm going to say is we all will make love for the last time. It's going to happen. We don't know when, probably, but it's going to happen. And what if tonight was your last opportunity with your partner? What would you want them to feel? What would you want them to know? How would you want them to feel your longing for them, your love for them? And show them that. Bring that to the bedroom tonight. And I think that if you let yourself really feel that, it can help remind you what sex can be. And it's not always going to be that intense, but it'll remind you what can happen.
Wow. What a way to end. Aww. So, Marianne, thank you so much for your time. Where can the audience find you and your work?
Well, you know what I would love? If I would love them to find me on my Psychology Today blog. It's called The Future of Intimacy. And it's such an important topic, and I really hope people will sort of join me there. I'm starting a podcast myself with my husband. He's a urologist, and we're actually going to be talking hormones because that's been his specialty in his career. And we're going to be talking AI and all these things that we find so interesting. It's called The Sex Doctors, but we haven't launched yet. We hope to launch like within a month. So look for us anywhere you watch your podcasts, and we will be there. It's just a matter of time.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for your time. And ladies and gentlemen, I give you Dr. Marianne Brandon.
Oh, Kat, it was my pleasure. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you for tuning in to Wisdom Rebellion. Before you go, if you enjoyed the conversation, please consider subscribing. It massively helps with keeping the show on the road so we can all build a wiser world together. And if you loved this video, you will also love this one. I'll see you there.